Now more than ever, innovative technologies are fueling change and sparking new ways of thinking. Collaboration between corporations and startups is key to staying at the forefront of these trends. However, finding the right startups can be expensive, time-consuming, and ineffective. But Plug and Play is here to help. As a corporate partner, you will gain access to a whole ecosystem of innovation. Discover startups that meet your tech interests. Stay updated on the latest trends and network with industry peers. We will help you during every stage of your innovation journey, no matter where you are and where you want to go. Get in touch today.
Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you for coming. This is the Innovation Best Practice Workshop. Today we will be focusing on resources, how best to provide those resources to your innovation agenda. Today, quick agenda for you. The first portion of the meeting today will be myself talking about how to effectively direct those resources towards an innovation agenda. I'll talk about important aspects of a highly effective program, hopefully give you some ideas as how you can maybe make some improvements there. I'll talk about POCs a little bit during this portion, but I think mostly we'll save that for the panel. We have Vandana and Avinash here. I'm really excited. They'll have some great insights about how to just run a POC. Okay, and I think I will go ahead and screen share here and we can get started. All right, so before we get started, I thought I might introduce myself. My name is Sean and I manage partners here at Plug and Play. You can see some of the logos on the screen here: Progressive, RAC, Vivienda. So I manage partners across InsurTech and FinTech as well. I've also helped develop some tools and products here at Plug and Play related to measuring and augmenting organizational innovation capabilities. So I'm also from Seattle. So if anyone is in the gray and the rain right now, please know I am very envious as I'm now located in California. So every system perfectly designed to get the results it gets. Well, this quote I think is certainly a sort of overused cliche. I think it's also quite insightful. A system, right, is only really the sum of its processes, of its systems, of its resources, of its just of its different parts, right? So that system that takes in inputs and then outputs results is sort of just tailor-made to get only those results. Volvo makes safe cars, Mercedes makes fast and luxurious vehicles. In order to change the results, you would need to change the system, and there are specific levers you can pull on in order to do that. I think this is the core idea towards making a business innovative. It's all about creating a system that is not only adaptable and accepting of change, but also actively seeks out that change while not foregoing any of the current and core business results. To lay down maybe some definitions on the next slide here. I think oftentimes innovation really is kind of this highly intangible buzzword. It's really just persistence and really disciplined project management. It's the process of finding new business models and products to forward your company's business interests. And that breaks down into a demand and supply of new ideas, right? Creating demand for new value that you've created, and then supplying that value in a way that is both profitable and scalable. I just wanted to put forth this idea of innovation as sort of value searching and capturing, because I think too often innovation is this sort of, like I said before, highly intangible buzzword, especially for those who are maybe like supporting characters to the core innovation agenda. It just isn't the case, right? It can be methodically executed just like anything else. Okay, so here at Plug and Play, we have developed and iterated this framework, the innovation capability model, for measuring the overall innovation capabilities of sort of industry agnostic companies across the board. And what it actually is a 48 question survey grouped into 5 dimensions. You can see the 5 dimensions here. And what it's measuring is what we have found to be the 5 most critical inputs to building a truly innovative business. And these dimensions are interrelated, constantly interacting with the others. None are able to exist in a vacuum without the others. Right? Systems to measure value within your organization are going to depend heavily on what the overall strategy is, so on. Each of these dimensions comprised of around 7 to 7, maybe 8 parameters that measure the overall efficacy of that dimension. For example, champions and resources, which I'll be talking more about today, might include role clarity, support function responsibilities, maybe budgets as well, sandbox if you have one. And while these dimensions are dynamic, interrelated for sure, I think that 3 dimensions here will heavily dictate the outcome of the other 2. And those 3 are resources, strategy, and your governance structure. And if any of you are familiar with the STAR model, you will be familiar with this concept of sort of strategy dictating all of the other dimensions. But in our collective experience here, working with other innovation programs, we've just found all 3 of these to be very important when it comes to just change management. Right. So if you are trying to push forward projects without the sort of formal and cultural approval of the C-suite, right, governance structure, you'll hit a ceiling very fast. And without resources to actually execute on these ideas, it just won't come through. I think with any business initiative, its success will depend heavily on leadership endorsement and what that support will actually look like in practice. So today, I will be diving deeper into the effective champions and sufficient resources dimension here. But I would like to briefly cover each so we have an idea of the framework as a whole. So just quickly, starting from the top, we have strategy, which has heavy influence over the others. I think effective strategy aligns everyone from frontline employees to C-suite, right? Just all in the same kind of mission, while ineffective strategy leaves employees lost. Governance, I think, is another dimension that is crucial. Without an empowering governance structure in place, without C-level endorsement, without open lines of communication, appropriate staffing, right? Projects will stall or completely fail. They hit a cultural ceiling as well. We have champions of resources, and again, I'll be going into this in detail, but just a few words here first, just kind of high level. I think, like I said before, it's going to measure items like budgets, support functions. I think it's very skeletal and essential. And I think something important to note here is that champions and resources is consistently a dimension where our corporate partners, they score very low on. And I think this is actually relatively unsurprising. Innovation initiatives are inherently risky, right? So placing resources towards them is a gamble, but that doesn't change how essential it is, right? Without a commitment of resources, I think a theoretical plan is just that. And it only turns into an explored business strategy upon that commitment. So we'll dive deeper into this one. We have systems to motivate and measure. This has to do mostly with metrics, engagement, and learnings. Questions like, is value creation considering metrics other than just financial ROI, P&L? So now we're talking about NPS, we're talking about customer retention, reputation, market reputation is important. Avoidance of market failures, I think, is also important here. And I won't be diving into this one. I think this one is just sort of proverbial icing on the cake, especially for programs who don't have their strategic direction, don't really have a clear governance structure in place, and maybe they're lacking resources as well. We have repeatable and lean processes. This has to do with work streams and tools. How are you engaging your separate support functions? Questions like this: is it standard? Is it known? And then overall here, you can see the graph is broken into 3 sections of decreasingly large circles. Each of these represents a stage of innovation maturity, the smallest circle being the least capable. Okay, so resources. I think sooner or later, all businesses, right, even the most successful, they run out of room to grow. And I think faced with this unpleasant reality, they are compelled to reinvent themselves periodically. And the ability to do this difficult feat, which is to say, kind of jump from maturity stage of one business to the growth stage of the next, is consistently what separates high performers from those whose time at the top is brief. Fact that constantly blows me away, and I think will continue to impress me as the rate of change just increases. It's the average time that a company spends in the Fortune 500 has more than halved to around 20 years over the last 50 years. So yeah, 50 years ago, it used to be closer to 40 or 50 average time in the Fortune 500. Now it's about 20. So resources, tools that you use on a day-to-day basis, the people on your team and your larger organization, education, training sessions as well, new hires, appropriate budgets. These are all resources, right? But making these resources available to the innovation agenda, I think, is hard work. And oftentimes that commitment just doesn't come through from leadership or even supporting cast members. So I think it's really a major reason as to why large companies churn out of the Fortune 500 so fast. And while strategy and governance encompass all other aspects of a strong innovation system, I think that proper resources are really the lifeblood. And without them, you're doomed for what may seem like a hopeful but repeatedly poor results output from your system. So today, I'm going to break that down, talk a little bit about how there are multiple parameters within each. I will break each of these down. But first, I wanted to provide a real world example of proper resourcing. I think a famously well-known case of premier resourcing has been ongoing for years now, almost a decade, in the world of Formula One racing, which is the top tier of racing internationally. Mercedes AMG has been dominant in the sport for years. And while it's known that they have the best driver in the sport, Lewis Hamilton, I think that such greatness actually started at the corporate level years ago, with a commitment to providing the team with the best resources, and crucially then to apply those resources unafraid of failure. The parent company allowed a very large budget to the racing team. It's the largest in Formula One. They adopted a culture that then embraced the spending of those resources on risky and experimental projects with a very low hit rate, but possible upside rate to make their cars much faster. And over time, they shed the thought of failure as bad, and instead they were excited by risk and they actively funded it. Projects that resulted in failure were no longer viewed as such, but instead more of a learning opportunity from which to grow and progress every time. The spending of resources on purely learning was actually commended, and engineers were free to do as they pleased, but still, of course, united under this defining core objective of building fast cars. And it was that commitment that changed the core culture within the racing team. I also wanted to bring up this example for another reason, and it is because Mercedes has the largest budget of any Formula One racing team, yes, and this makes a huge difference, right? Access to more resources that allow you to explore more ideas that just take place at a higher level of spending. But I do want to point out that it just does not mean the world at all. We've seen this with Ferrari year over year. Ferrari's budget is quite close to that of Mercedes, actually, both in the $400 million to $500 million range. But over the last decade, they've failed to see any success with their race cars. And what I mean to say is that your budget, while certainly the size will matter, I think it's really the way that you apply it towards these impactful projects. The methods with which you use to apply the spending, the focus on capturing learnings off the back of failures, open communication forums between senior management, maybe the engineering team, right? So much more around how big your budget is and how you are utilizing them. It just has a major influence on your ability to achieve success. So how are we doing on time here? Okay. Okay, so as I said before, Each of these 5-dimension ICM are comprised of multiple parameters. I decided to pull these 6 to talk about today at sort of varying levels of depth for each. I personally consider some of these more important than others, but I think the applicability will just really depend on your organization. So please, none of these are really like the gospel truth. I think it just depends on your organization. So I just please consider them individually for your own situation. I've started the ones that I feel to be particularly important, the purple stars there. And these ones I'll break down even further. But at a high level, let's go through all of these. Okay, first we have clearly defined innovation leaders and team members within our business and across third-party vendors who drive and support our innovation agenda. Strong leaders of the innovation agenda are so essential. They are just absolutely essential. Effective and senior individuals with strong social ties and some level of technical or business experience is just so important. The social ties especially. I'll talk about this one more later. We have clearly defined roles and responsibilities for supporting functions. If your organization were to undertake a POC, other innovation project, right, who would get involved to make sure that the success, support functions can easily make or break a project. Talk about that in a second. Our innovation leads have a direct reporting line into the C-level / senior executives for decision making. This is similar, I think, to having strong innovation leaders. Right? Is change being driven from the top, from the middle? If it's not coming from the top, it might struggle. We have established an effective forums and/or channels for alignment over innovation activities. Open communication, so important for all teams. I'm not going to talk about this one. I think it could look very different between organizations, but I think just generally considering how important open communication is, definitely consider it. All right, next we have our teams and business units have appropriate budgets for driving the innovation agenda, including training, procurement, running pilots, etc. I think we all realize the importance of a healthy budget, so I will talk about this one more in a bit. Organization recurrently hires from other companies or industries to accelerate our innovation activities. Won't be talking about this one, but I think injecting your organization with talent from another company who is maybe more technology or change facing, or alternatively hiring from another industry who is maybe just completely different, I think can just help change attitudes and bring new perspectives. Okay, so to get a little bit deeper, it looks like we're doing okay on time here. Okay, we have clearly defined innovation leaders and team members within our business and across third-party vendors who drive and support our innovation agenda. Okay, so today I won't be talking about third-party vendors, as I think by virtue of you all being here, I think you understand the importance of these external networks like Plug and Play. Integrating, I think, expertise that your company just doesn't have and really should not even be expected to have is fine. This is a fine way to spend money, and I think connecting with industry peers is great. Internally, though, within your organization, let's go a bit deeper. I think this parameter is crucial, certainly, and also structural in terms of what it provides if done well. It has to do mostly with a properly staffed as well as kind of advocates throughout your organization. Now, in terms of project leaders and innovation leaders who are core to the innovation agenda, like I said before, it's just so important to have senior people with strong social ties be these champions. And these are people who are well connected, they're well liked, they are actively interested in and tied to the innovation agenda. People who are well liked have a much larger network of advocates internally and better connections to source ideas and move projects forward. So I think ideally, this network of advocates, so not just the champions, but also the network of advocates, they are also full of senior and well-connected individuals. Business unit heads are often invaluable as innovation champions, in my experience, for several reasons. Crucially, because business unit leaders know intimately the needs, sort of the wants, any of the challenge areas, opportunity areas of the business line that they're in charge of. These focus areas are oftentimes where innovation projects get sourced from, right? The loan syndication team at XYZ Bank would know kind of firsthand if there was an opportunity to save costs in their business unit, or maybe white label to increase traffic, whatever it may be. If this internal network of advocates and champions is something that you maybe don't have right now, my first suggestion would be to try to just informally build it out. Take the head of legal out to lunch, or maybe schedule a Zoom meeting to just introduce yourself. See if you can't do them any favors. Perhaps come prepared with ideas that might drive cost savings or process efficiency, anything else that might benefit the manager of that business unit. I think formally, you could request that senior leaders get tied into the innovation agenda via maybe a monthly meeting, Slack channel, maybe bonuses, monthly bonuses, other rewards, new titles, anything else that your organization uses to tie people together and also provide incentive. Ensure also meetings are enjoyable. Champions of innovation feel kind of special in a way. There is open communication then from the C-level around how important it really is. And then lastly, I would say, define innovation roles and team members. I would say build an org map of the advocates in your organization, as it will help tremendously when you are trying to internally navigate and trying to execute on these projects, right? Running a POC and a startup needs access to a certain database, it will help to have an established IT leader who understands the process. They're already involved with the other innovation leaders. They might already be able to answer questions like, where do certain people, business lines contribute in the funnel? What does that overall funnel actually look like? Who's making decisions along it? How are they being weighed? I want to stress the network of advocates. Really, it can be your most useful tool if done correctly. And generally, I urge you to consider just the human aspect of larger tribe management here. Make your champions feel special. Take them out to lunch. Just consider the social ties, consider the overall human aspect of just this large organization that you're a part of. Okay. This one, we have clearly defined roles and responsibilities for supporting functions. Actually has decent overlap with the last, in that these supporting functions should be a part of your network. But I think it's crucial to separate them from formal support from any of the support functions. If you're running a POC with a company that needs your HR data, legal is going to need to make sure that the startup is compliant with the relevant regulations. They might have to set up an NDA. IT might need to manage a data handover. So having these support functions set up and ready to go is invaluable, and also certainly separate from the network of advocates. I'm going to hit maybe all of these functions briefly, maybe not HR. I think we're running short on time here, but certainly IT and legal. So maybe IT and data first. I think it's important to consider what questions you're going to need to ask. What type of data will you need to transfer if you're engaging in a partnership? Do you have synthetic customer data prepared? Is the data PII, personally identifiable? If yes, maybe what are the SOC 2 and compliance standards that you and your partner in organization will need to hit? Understanding that the resources that a pilot or full implementation will require of your organization's IT department is important to its success. But I think imperative to success is that you've not only took the time to understand what IT resources are needed, but then you've also prepared your organizations for the commitment of handoffs, of various checkpoints, and then the time committed that is going to be needed from every person in that department. At Plug and Play, we see every year pilots fail because of a failure to provide IT resources to a project. And as a corporate on the side of pilots, if you haven't taken the time to understand implementation requirements, and it turns out that the startup you've agreed to partner with needs synthetic data, it may take 6 months to prepare that data. And if it was initially prepared right, you would have been ready to actually execute on that. And 6 months can be a long time, at which point leadership may have gotten bored, lost interest, or strategic goals may have just shifted completely. So an important one for sure. Next, we have legal. I think this is another crucial support function. As of course, I've seen pilots fail because of a lack of IT and data resources, or maybe just slow resources. I've also seen pilots fail for lack of maybe NDAs materializing in enough time. And as I think with the parameter before, it's important to think about the overall funnel, and where certain functions will need to come in and then support the project, and ensuring that they are well prepared to do that. I think the wisdom here is probably similar to that of IT. Make sure people are prepared and ready to commit time and resources. Are we doing on time? Okay, quick thought on product and business line here. Briefly mentioned it before, but want to hit it again. These groups are really essential when it comes to sourcing new innovation projects from around the company. I think anything that is customer facing or product facing is just invaluable when it comes to sourcing new ideas. Product teams often are collecting information, on usage and customer feeling. They make excellent wells of knowledge to improve the overall offering, if not just do something transformative. So definitely keep that in mind. Okay, 2 more to go here, and I will hurry up, I promise. Budget, I think pretty straightforward, but definitely important. If you're on the innovation team, you won't want to come groveling to senior management every time you need money. So probably important to set aside. I'm going to break down an example budget here. I think first, again, with the third-party networks, I won't go into it, but subscription and membership fees are important if you want to incorporate some sort of capabilities that really aren't your own company's. For example, a yearly Plug and Play membership to inform your technology insights, right? Maybe it's research subscriptions to paid blogs or publications. Okay, moving along quickly here. We have POCs. This would be money paid to startups. I think it's important to account for the fact that you are intending, or at least hoping, to undertake several POCs every year. And I think when considering how many to plan for, it's important to start small and with quality. We have partners who undertake 10 to 15 in a year, but if you're just starting out, this is just not a good idea. It's much more useful and important to take on just one POC and then use it as a lighthouse project for the others. Do it right. And even if it doesn't turn into implementation, capture learnings from failure that one time, and then consider realistically your capabilities to actually run those POCs. Data, legal, these support functions, your own team. And then estimate conservatively how many you can accomplish in a year. I think as for cost per POC, unfortunately, a ballpark number is just not very useful. I get this question a lot from my partners. And I could tell you to allocate $50,000 per POC, and that may end up being the right amount, but that likely be chance. And the odds it varies are high. The reality of cost for POCs is that it just varies so much depending on the impact of the project. Will it require 5 engineers, 6 months time for implementation? I think, probably not. I hope not. But if you're revamping your entire brand customer experience, then that might be appropriate. My advice here would be to find some reference points and then allow leadership to get comfortable with a range of prices. Implementation fees, this is going to act much the same as POCs, but costs will vary, as in costs will vary depending on the project, Here though, I think just plan for a frequency that's just much lower than the POCs. Across our ecosystem, we've seen that only around 1 or in 10 or maybe 2 in 10 POCs turn into commercial rollout. So that could be a good figure to plan around. It's not to say that you're not getting value every time. I think the failures are oftentimes more important than the ones that pan out well. And then also tracking your organizational insights, how are people reacting, what worked, what didn't work. Travel and internal staffing, those are both important. Kind of running short on time here, so I'll just skip to the last parameter. I think those are staffing and travel are pretty straightforward. Okay, our innovation leads have a direct reporting line into the C-level / senior executives for decision making. I think it is easy for corporate executives, to no fault of their own, to lose steam on projects over time. If they don't happen in a timely manner, it can lose momentum. It's hard to gain continued support. So when you consider that POCs and pilots have a hit rate of 1 in 10, 2 in 10, like I said, it's easy to see why effective communication and then alignment over innovation activities is just so important. I sympathize with corporate sponsors who might commit to 7 POCs in a row with no commercial rollout. But part of having these direct reporting lines and effective communication forums is communicating that failure, because failure might have actually been the ideal world scenario here. Say if you were considering building something internally, important to ingest those learnings every time. Last note here, I suggest to move innovation as high up in your organization as possible. Senior management makes crucial decisions over staffing. They have visibility across the whole company, control of the budget. So a C-level or a senior manager heading innovation or ensuring open communication between management and innovation, it allows for that agenda to take an elevated position within the company. And this can look different across organizations. It could be a biweekly meeting between the CEO and the head of innovation. It could be a chief innovation officer pushing forward the agenda just herself or himself. It could be a council of people together. Whatever it is, I think you need to find the right fit for your own organization, but important to move it as high as possible in your org. Okay, and sorry for going a little bit over time here according to the agenda, but thank you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and my email's right there. If you're interested in having a conversation about the ICM or any of its individual parts, please reach out. All right, well, now we have our panel, Vandana and Adarsh. Thank you both so much for being here.
Hi, everyone.
You're very welcome.
Okay, so today, I thought it'd be great to get your insights on how to run a POC from the startup side. So I guess, Vandana, I would start with you, and Avinash, I'd love to have you answer this question as well. Before I start, excuse me, sorry. While we're doing this panel, please, if you have questions for either of them, I would love for you to just pop them in the chat. I have questions prepared here, but it'd be great if you could just use this as a time, to use them as resources. So please just go for it if you have any questions. Start with you, Vandana. I would ask, I guess, first generally, what would you tell a corporation going through the POC process for the first time? Is there any just general wisdom on how to interact with a startup?
Sure. Hi, everyone. First of all, very happy to be here. I am assuming everybody here is from corporations, Sean. Is that our audience today?
Yeah, sorry, and I forgot to mention, if you guys want to do introductions as well, that'd be great.
No worries. Yeah, so I'm responsible for customer success and growth at Usher. Usher is a AI-powered customer experience automation platform, and our mission and goal is to help our enterprises bring Amazon-like experiences to their clients, their end users, their business partners. And Avinash, I'd love to have you introduce yourself before we get started on this.
Absolutely. My name is Avinash, CEO and co-founder of Scan. Scan is a process intelligence firm. We have a very different way of figuring out what business processes look like in large scale settings, which is to look at the screen where work is happening. So we have computer vision and technologies to be able to observe work as it is happening in complex business processes on the screen, to build out the nuances, exceptions, and permutations of business processes without ever disrupting anyone's work or integrating into backend systems. So it's like AI that observes and learns the business that you're working on. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Varna, to speak a bit about Scan.
And it's lovely for our audience to hear about two aspects, right? Because it's really important to understand the process that you want to then automate. So both our companies are kind of partners in that sense. And we are working across a few plug and play partners together as well to solve their problems. So coming back to your question, Sean, can I have people just interact and say how many of you are from the innovation side of your companies? Can you just is there a way to react with a thumbs up on the reactions? Okay, seeing a couple.
I can see a few who, if they don't raise their hands, I will call them out because I know some of them. And yes, okay, one of them raised their hand, our good friend from John Deere. So indeed,
awesome.
Yes. And
that's great. So it looks like there are a few from innovation. Do we also have business owners here? Any business owners? Okay, so maybe it's mostly innovation. So if it is true that most of our audience is innovation, then like Sean, as you were saying, I think one of the key things for you to remember is that any POC with a startup, and depending on the stage of the startup, you might be talking to a startup which has 5 people. They're just coming up with the idea right now, all the way to companies such as Avinash's and mine, which are much larger startups. But remember, it's all about the people at the end of the day. And when Sean, you said, the success rate of POCs to implementation is it could be anywhere from 10 to 20%, right? That's the average that you see. Just remember that startups are giving their all when they are starting this relationship with you, because especially for the early stage startups, you are going to be one of their first 10 customers. And that's a very special relationship. So when you're thinking about doing a POC, you've already narrowed it down to a startup. Just remember to keep in mind if the people that you're interacting with are the people that you want to have a long-term relationship. That's important. And then also know, and you'll get early signals, right, on whether those people are the right people. If they are willing to go through, because every interaction, every solution that you come up with, you may start off with something, but the reality might end up being something different, because as we know, in an agile world, you don't have that prefixed notion of what needs to be built, because as you learn and you test and you fail, you'll find out more. So make sure that these are the people that you want to kind of go on that journey with. And then the second thing that I'd like to say is just make sure that the problem that you're trying to solve has a compelling event associated with it, because that's a great way to bring people together from both sides, whether it is from the enterprise, whether it's from your, like Sean said, right? How do I get legal support? How do I get IT support? If there is a compelling event which has business buy-in, then that's a great way to bring things together.
Okay, great, thank you. And Avinash, I might ask you as well, any first-time wisdom to a corporation going through this process for the first time?
I think there are many layers, of how an organization should engage with startups. And some of our most successful initiatives with corporations have been, which have certain kind of characteristics that are in common. Number one, I think they recognize the fact that they cannot deploy the same level of paraphernalia or accoutrements on that process to bring a startup in as they deploy for the other vendors, right? So vendor onboarding is different from a startup onboarding. It's the realization of this that kicks into place many things that they need to have from that point on. So for example, one of our customers actually has a startup focused set of people who make sure that they are like the customer success on the customer side. So we have a customer success, but they have a startup success manager who makes sure that as we go through the InfoSec checks and as questions are raised by the InfoSec teams, then those questions are answered. Well, we'll have a limited scope. We'll take it on non-critical data. We will have a sequestered set of machines to be able to run the pilot. All of these questions, they provide the motive force and the lubrication that it takes to do this. So any organization, if it has that level of thinking and it puts into it, it's not a big investment, but just that thought changes everything. And so I would say that the starting point is very important. And then once you move beyond the starting point, as this conversation goes on, we'll talk more about okay, what are the other stumbling blocks, both from our side and from the partner side, corporate partner side, that we can look into. But that's the first one that I'll put into place.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And maybe similar, and I'll just go back to you, Avinash. If you have any wisdom around common pitfalls or mistakes you've seen happen through your work with various corporations.
Yeah, you see as Stephen Blank puts it, he says a startup is a proto-organization in search of a business model. I'd like to add to that, a startup is a proto-organization with a certain solution that thinks of the solution in search of a business model. So if you just take that definition, there will be a number of things that the startup is unaware of other than its core thesis, right? And so the organizations must admit the fact that they are getting something in return. They are getting a new value proposition with a new solution, and it does not come in the form of a business model. Once they recognize this, everything becomes easier on both sides. And so we as Scan always make it a point to remind customers that this is the core innovation we are bringing in. Our organization, in some sense, is a proto-organization. It is not a 15-year-old organization. Certain things may not be backed in. But if you focus on this value, then there is light at the end of the day, and we'll work with you to solve these problems. So that is one point that I believe is extremely important to convey. And there's a certain sense of honesty that the startup must have, and a certain sense of confidence that the startup must have in being able to convey this and say this clearly. Now, of course, it takes two to tango. So on the other side, also, there must be receptivity, and there must be people who are willing to take risks. And I've been very fortunate, and has been Vandana's company, Vandana's CEO, Simha, is a good friend of mine. And I think both of us have been very fortunate as entrepreneurs to get into customer situations where customers have seen core value. And some of those customers, I don't know if I name them or not, but some of those customers have come through a common introduction at Plug and Play, right? So Plug and Play has been a very important element to our both our journeys at Usher and at Scan in bringing customers who really recognize that yes, this has to be done. There is a certain value proposition from these companies, and got to be patient and and look at what are the core areas where we must focus on, and not be distracted by all the other things that will happen over time.
It was very insightful. I'm shedding a tear as well for the Plug and Play shout out. And Vandana, I would ask the same question of you. If you've seen any kind of common pitfalls, common mistakes across your work.
Sure, I'll kind of go tactical. I would say there are two kind of themes I've seen. One is especially when you're starting out with, like you said, right? I'm assuming the audience is kind of thinking of starting off in this whole POC journey, is when you treat POCs as a transactional exercise within the company. And you don't think about what it would be at scale. So here's the challenge, right? As because POC is expected to be a low risk interaction with the startup, or for that matter, any partner, any vendor. You don't want to invest a lot into a POC from both sides. You don't want it to be taking up the entire set of resources that you have. But at the same time, the goal should be, if this POC meets its success criteria, all right, we are going into deployment, right? That should be the thinking. So where I've seen that fail is when everybody's just so focused on, let's get this POC done. Forget about what it's going to cost. Let's forget about trying to get the cost benefit analysis done for what deployment at scale looks like before or interim during the POC. And you do a POC, it meets all the success criteria defined by, by the business or like by the innovation team, and then that's it, right? It comes to a standstill. So to your point earlier, Sean, where you said you need to have exec buy-in, but at the same time, you also need to have business buy-in that if something gets proven, let's go immediately take it to market. Because that's the agility that startups give as an accelerator to enterprises, right? The startups are willing to move really fast to, like Avinash said, be that adjunct organization of yours to help you scale and become agile. And if you don't look at that as a whole journey, then both sides will be disappointed at the end of the day. Because I'm sure no innovation department wants to just do POCs for the sake of doing POCs. At the end of the day, you have to show business value. That's first. And then the second thing, I know this may be a little controversial, is when I've seen POCs run purely out of innovation, without having a strong business champion aligned at the get-go, I've seen that become potential for similar kind of a fall off of interest and motivation, because the innovation team is fully bought in, but then there isn't somebody on the at scale side, the run side, to take it to market. So I would suggest try to kind of watch out for those two things.
Okay, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you talked a lot about buy-in there. I think a lot of buy-in comes from an organizational just understanding of the need for a partnership. So I guess I would ask you, how do you come to just understand the need for a partnership? I might imagine that a lot of the corporate interest is maybe not as focused as you might want it to be at the beginning. So how do you go about that process of understanding the need?
So I think the innovation partner on the enterprise side has a huge role to play there. And I think you hit upon that in your earlier part of the session. So knowing it's heavily tilted towards being socially plugged into the enterprise, I would say, right? Because you're right, the problems that the innovation partner would have heard would be, a few things here and there, and they are playing that matchmaker role because they are trying to see, okay, I'm hearing of a few things, a few pain points, and let me see what startups have. Or on the flip side, I'm seeing some interesting ideas here, and let me see if I can plug that back into real business problems. And that's a very delicate interaction, and it requires a very, very skilled innovation leader to drive that. And I've seen that done amazingly well in a couple of actually partners that have come in through Plug and Play, because you need to know who the change agents are in these companies. It's not just going to be the leaders, right? Because the leaders will define the overall agenda and goal for the company, but really the change agents are embedded all over. So knowing the right change agents to pull them in at the right time, I think is a key element of getting to the right partnership.
Okay, thank you. And Avinash, maybe same question, understanding the need.
I think ultimately it boils down to sharpness, right? How sharply you can get to the organization that you're targeting, the partner, and help them internally articulate very clearly and very sharply the value prop. I think once that value prop is induced, then it becomes easier for the innovation managers to speak to Vandana's point, right? Whether or not they're involved at the start, or as you start, they start getting involved. But I do agree that they have to get involved. The ease with which you can convey that this is the value prop to you guys, right? From a business point of view. Now, we might be bringing in artificial intelligence or Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, whatever technology is into play. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to go to the line of business manager, the chief claims officer, the chief innovation, the chief operations officer, and say, well, we're running a POC. If this POC is successful, this is what you achieve very clearly, right? Once that happens, you will see greater interest and you will see greater buy-in. All the things will happen. But if you wait for hey, we will run the POC, we'll end the POC, then the sales cycle gets exceptionally long, and somewhere, time kills all deals kind of situation, right? And it kills for you, and it also kills for the innovation group as well. So at the best of the organizations that we work with, and we've been very fortunate, is that we've had line of business owners interacting at the very initial stages of the POC, saying, all right, you guys are doing this. What am I going to get? In fact, what we've also have seen there in those cases, that those line of business managers have been proactive in saying that, yes, you are doing this POC, but these are the outcomes I want to see at the end of the POC. And so this involvement is not a science, but it is an art of how clearly you are able to say the value proposition. What examples do you give to your innovation head so that they can take it inside the organization?
I think something important that both of you guys touched on there is the social ties created through both organizations and also internally, right? So important to actually execute on these ideas. Avinash, curious what resources maybe you commonly draw on from within corporate organizations during partnerships, and of course, there's money paid, but also talking about maybe individuals within the organization, lines of communication that have proven valuable, centralized documentation, maybe anything like that.
Yeah, so I think that number one, you need to, as a startup, we always endeavor to find a champion, at the same time talk to multiple people within the organization and bring them that we are doing this pilot, this is what you could get out of them. But at the end of the day, if I look back on all the places where we've been successful, there's been someone in the organization who believed in us. And it is very important that you that as startups, we are able to convey to at least one person in the organization who really believes that, yes, this is where it is today, but if we do this right, then this is where it can be. And I can only, silently thank those champions in those organizations and sometimes these things spread out over time. So, it's not like you go and you do the pilot and next day you have a contract. After all, the partner wants to look at you over a period of time, work with you, and so on and so forth before these things happen. In that sense, the investment in mapping out the organization, both at the business side, the IT side, the infosec side, the contracting side, and if you have people that you are in touch with, the process goes much smoother. Otherwise, then you're in the dark, and especially in these times, right? Last 1.5 years, my company was born in the pandemic and continue to thrive and build in the pandemic. So we've not met most of the customers. In fact, I have on this call, we have at least 3 people who I'm working with, and I have never met them in person, and they know who I'm talking about exactly. But even on this call, I've never met them, right? And probably we've only met through Zoom. But they are our champions in those organizations, and they're pushing us forward through InfoSec, through various other things. So it is vitally important. But at the same time, the reason they are our champions is because we have been very clear also to them that this is what we can do. This is net new. This is what you will not achieve through other mechanisms. If you do this, there is gain to be had for your organization. So you have to be able to create a win for your champions too. It's not a one-way street. So unless you create a win for your champions, why will they invest time? They have limited amount of time, and they have to choose to invest it wisely for their organization. And so only if you are able to create that value prop for them and for their organization, will they become your champions. Yeah. So I always come back, as a startup, your only weapon is clarity. Extreme clarity in what you're doing and what you're building for your customer. And that clarity also means saying things that you cannot do, saying things that you will not be able to do. And yes, there's a price to be paid for not doing those things, and you're willing to pay that price.
I think it comes down to the power of no, right? As startups, I think all of us have had to be disciplined in mastering the power of no. But Avinash, great point there. The fact that you have to have that trusted relationship with your champions and stakeholders is critical. Otherwise, without that honesty and that acceptance of that relationship, there isn't much of a interaction to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's just maybe time for one more question. And Vandana, we can start with you. Did really want to ask you both about the implementation rollout decision. So just curious, and again, Vandana, we start with you. How do you approach the implementation rollout decision? Are you constantly tracking metrics, or how do you do that?
I think KPIs are critical. Before even embarking on a POC, we require from at least the way we design our POCs to have KPIs clearly articulated, and we adjust those KPIs depending on how the systems progress. But KPIs are critical. Starting to build, the good thing about our products are, we are cloud-based platforms, right? So it's not implementation in your traditional implementation sense. There isn't a heavy lift, but building ballpark integration plans, because every implementation has to be integrated into the enterprise. Otherwise, it's just a one-off. So building that plan out is critical. And for me, the main metric, again, given the time, main metric is time to value. What is the time to value that the enterprise starts seeing the results for? That's what we are laser focused on reducing.
Okay, that's great. And Avinash, same question to you. How do you approach the implementation decision?
Well, some answers are so good that you don't need to repeat them. I think Vandana's answer was absolutely spot on. I think time to value, clarity of vision, what you're giving, what you're not giving, right? I think those would be the building blocks of that answer. So absolutely spot on, Vandana.
Okay, thank you both. Well, really, seriously, both of you. Appreciate you being here. It's been fantastic. And I guess maybe just before we wrap up here, I might open it up to the audience in case there were any questions. Okay.
We nailed it, Avinash. You were so good. There are no questions.
Exactly. If anyone would like to get in touch with anyone here, my email was presented earlier, but again, it's s.voelk@pnptc.com. If you want to get in touch with either Vandana or Avinash here. Thank you both. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.